Welcome to another episode of Hannah Joy Paints. I'm Hannah Joy, and I'll be your guide today as we dream of summertime and adventures in fresh, cold mountain waterfalls. In a previous video, we discussed the composition and planning of this little painting of my young friend. I'll link that in the description below. Here's the original photo. Some of the changes I made were a little cropping and moving some of the rocks in the mid-ground in relation to my friend's head so she wouldn't blend in so much. I always start with a detailed pencil drawing because by spending the time to really study my reference, it helps to plan out what areas I would like to emphasize in terms of composition, such as this strong diagonal of the rocks here I'm working on. Then I move on to inking my drawing, being sensitive to line weight, being sure to have thinner lines in the background and thicker lines where I want emphasis or more shaded areas. It also gives me time to consider big questions like, how in the world do I paint water? Or how do I get that bright orange sunlight on the rocks in the background? Right, so on to color. I'm using Rosco Super Saturated Paint, which was developed for painting scenery and backdrops for theater, and acts like gouache or watercolor. It can be thinned out a fair way while still retaining its rich pigments. I start painting by layering in the overall tone in each area. I kept in mind the areas of warm and cool I identified in the composition phase. Remember I said the two big challenges were the water and the sunny background? So I started by painting the brightest oranges I saw in my reference over the whole warm rocky area, then adding in larger shadow and shade shapes, but keeping everything warm. Now, for the water. It's like an onion. It has layers. Think about the layers this way. The bottom of the water, if you can see it, the color and density of the water, the surface of the water and reflections. Sometimes the reflections cut through the surface and reveal the bottom, like the rock reflection on the left, and some will show themselves as a mirror image on the surface of the water, like the trees on the lower right. Then the last layer to think about is the highlight and shiny bits. I tend to paint the colors where I see them in the water in the lightest and least saturated version I can see of that color in the reference, then go back to deepen each color as needed depending on if it is part of the bottom layer or a cut-through reflection, the surface of the water, or a surface reflection. After the saturation of the color is sorted, the shade areas can be added in. These are usually a cooler and grayer version of the color in each area. You can see this as the ripples in the surface of the water get their shade and start to look like they have form. I continue adding shaded areas or other bits of toning around the page to balance everything out before adding deep shadows. It's the shadow shapes that really help inform what's going on in our painting. They tell us the direction and quality of light. They can also tell us what kind of surface they are being cast on, like the shadow of my friend in the water. Her shadow is broken up along the surface of the water she herself has disturbed with brave steps. Mountain water is still pretty cold midsummer. From here, highlights can be added in the appropriate places. Highlights are on the side of the object facing the light source and usually take on the color of the light. Here it's late afternoon, so the sunlight is a bit more golden on the background rocks than it would be earlier in the day. The areas that are not in direct sunlight, like the pool of water, will still have some highlight influenced by the reflected light in the area. In our case, it's the ambient daylight filtered through trees. Up to this point, I had been working with the paint in thin, transparent layers, but to add some brighter highlights, I added a touch of white to my paint and used a little less water to add more solid light areas over darker ones. From here, it's adding a bit of dark or light here and there to ensure there is enough information for the eye to clearly understand this picture. Hopefully one sees a late afternoon adventure of my young friend into a favorite summer swimming hole cleft into mysterious mountains. Thanks again for joining me. If you wish to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing. I'm Hannah Joy, and I'll see you next time.